The day Tom died, I was sitting in a dentist's chair getting a crown fitted. My phone buzzed 3 times before the hygienist finally handed it to me. It was Tom's wife, Linda. She didn't say much, just that Tom had collapsed at the warehouse, and by the time the paramedics arrived, he was gone. Massive heart attack. 62 years old. I remember staring at my reflection in that little circular mirror they use to check your molars. The Novocaine was still working, so half my face hung slack and numb. That's how I felt. Numb. Not because Tom and I were particularly close friends. We weren't. But because in that moment, sitting in that chair with my mouth full of cotton and my business partner dead, I realized I had no idea what happened to our company now. Tom handled everything. The warehouse, the inventory, the distribution schedules. Every Friday morning for 20 years, he'd drive out to our facility on the south side and spend the entire day there. Said he needed to personally oversee things. I'd stopped questioning it 15 years ago. We ran a mid-sized industrial supply company. Nothing glamorous. We sold fasteners, safety equipment, and warehouse supplies to manufacturers across the Midwest. Tom managed operations. I handled sales and client relationships. It worked. We each stayed in our lane. We made good money. Not spectacular, but solid. Enough that I'd put both my kids through college debt-free and had a comfortable retirement account growing steadily. The funeral was on a Wednesday. Small service. Tom wasn't a church guy, and Linda wanted to keep it private. Their 2 daughters flew in from Seattle and Boston. I sat in the 3rd row and listened to the pastor talk about Tom's dedication to his work, his love for his family, his quiet generosity. That last part made me shift in my seat. Generous? Tom drove a 12-year-old Camry and brought the same turkey sandwich to the office every single day. He'd argued with me for 3 hours about upgrading our coffee maker because the new one cost $80 more than the old model. After the service, Linda pulled me aside in the church parking lot. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she held a tissue balled up in her fist. "David," she said, "I need to talk to you about the warehouse." "Of course," I said. "Whatever you need. I'll handle everything. Don't worry about the business right now." She shook her head. "It's not that. It's just, Tom had some things there. Personal things. In his office. I can't face going through them yet, but I thought you should know. The key to his office is in his desk drawer at your main office." I nodded, squeezed her shoulder, and told her to take all the time she needed. The truth is, I'd been to our warehouse maybe 6 times in the past 10 years. Tom was territorial about it, and I respected that. We each had our domains. Mine was the corporate office downtown. His was the warehouse facility 40 minutes south on Route 47. The building itself was nothing special. A 30,000 square foot metal structure we'd bought back in 2005, surrounded by a gravel lot and a chain link fence. We employed 8 warehouse workers and 2 shift supervisors. Tom knew all their names, their kids' names, what they did on weekends. I barely recognized them when they showed up at the funeral. I drove out there the following Friday. I don't know why I chose Friday. Maybe because that's when Tom always went. Maybe I thought there'd be some kind of poetic symmetry to it. The morning was cold and gray, the kind of November day where the sky presses down on everything and turns the whole world the color of concrete. The warehouse manager, a guy named Pete, who'd worked for us since the beginning, met me at the entrance. He was a big man, mid-50s, with hands like baseball mitts and a salt and pepper beard. "Mr. Harrison," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was gentle, careful. "I'm real sorry about Tom." "Thank you, Pete. I appreciate it. You need anything, you just ask. We're all trying to keep things running smooth, the way Tom would want." I told him I just needed to check Tom's office, gather some personal effects for Linda. Pete nodded and led me through the main warehouse floor. The space smelled like cardboard and machine oil. Forklifts hummed in the distance. Workers moved between the towering rows of industrial shelving, pulling orders, checking inventory. Everything seemed to be functioning exactly as it should. Tom's office was in the back corner of the building, a small room with windows that overlooked the loading docks. The door was unlocked. Inside, Everything was exactly as I'd expected. Neat, organized, a metal desk with a computer, a filing cabinet, a bookshelf with binders labeled by year. There was a photo of Linda and the girls on the desk, taken maybe 15 years ago at someone's graduation, everyone smiling. I sat down in Tom's chair. It creaked under my weight. The leather was worn smooth on the armrests where his elbows had rested for 2 decades. I opened the desk drawers one by one. Pens, paper clips, a stapler, a bag of peppermints, a small calculator. Nothing unusual, nothing that explained why Tom spent every single Friday here for 20 years. I pulled open the bottom drawer. That's where I found the second key. It was taped to the underside of a folder, a small silver key on a red string. No label, no indication of what it opened. I turned it over in my fingers, feeling the weight of it. Then I noticed something else in the drawer. A sticky note, yellowed with age, with Tom's handwriting on it. Just 2 words. Warehouse office. But I was in the warehouse office. I stood up, looking around the room. One office. That's all there was. Unless. I walked back out to the main floor and found Pete. Pete, how many offices does Tom have here? He looked at me, confused. Just the one you were in. Why? Has there ever been another office? Maybe one that got converted into storage or something? Pete scratched his beard, thinking. Well, there's that room off the back hallway, past the employee break room. But that's been locked since before I started working here. Tom said it was old equipment storage. Never went in there myself. My heart started beating faster. Can you show me? We walked through the warehouse, past the break room with its humming refrigerator and coffee-stained counter, to a hallway I'd never noticed before. At the end was a gray metal door, with no window, no sign, just a door. Pete tried the handle. Locked. I pulled out the silver key. It slid into the lock like it was made for it. The door opened with a soft click. Inside was another office. But this one was nothing like the neat, organized space Tom worked in. This room was full. Filing cabinets lined 3 walls, stacked too high in some places. A desk sat in the middle, buried under folders and binders and loose papers. A corkboard on one wall was covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, handwritten notes. The air smelled stale, like no one had opened a window in years. Pete stood in the doorway behind me. Jesus, he whispered. I had no idea. I stepped inside, my hands trembling. The photographs on the corkboard caught my attention first. They weren't family photos. They were pictures of people I didn't recognize. Families standing in front of houses. Kids in graduation gowns. A young woman holding a newborn baby. An elderly couple sitting on a porch swing. Each photo had a small handwritten note pinned next to it. Names, dates, dollar amounts. Martinez family, $15,000. June, 2019. Home repairs after fire. Chen family, $8,000. September 2020. Medical bills. Robertson, $12,000. March 2018. Daughter's college tuition. I counted 43 photographs, 43 families. The dollar amounts ranged from $5,000 to $25,000. I did the math in my head. Conservative estimate. Over $500,000. Pete, I said, my voice barely working. Did Tom ever mention any of this to you? Never. I swear. I didn't even know this room existed. I sat down at the desk, careful not to disturb the organized chaos. There were bank statements in one pile, all from an account I'd never heard of. Personal checks made out to individuals, photocopied before being sent. Donation receipts from charities. Letters from people thanking Tom for his help. One letter, written in shaky handwriting on lined notebook paper, was from a woman named Dorothy Garcia. Mr. Tom, it read, I don't know how to thank you enough for helping with Marcus's surgery. The doctors say he's going to make a full recovery. You saved my grandson's life. God bless you. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't right. Tom didn't have this kind of money. Our business did well, but we weren't wealthy. We paid ourselves reasonable salaries, around $150,000 a year each. Good money. but not give away $500,000 money. I started going through the bank statements more carefully. The account was in Tom's name only. Deposits came in monthly, like clockwork, but they weren't from our business payroll. They came from a different account, one labeled TH Operations LLC. I'd never heard of TH Operations. I spent the next 3 hours going through every file in that room. Pete eventually left, telling me he'd lock up the warehouse when I was done. I barely heard him leave. I was too focused on piecing together what Tom had been doing. Here's what I found. 20 years ago, right around the time we bought the warehouse, Tom had set up a separate LLC. On paper, TH Operations was a consulting firm that provided services to our main company. Every month, our business paid TH Operations a fee for warehouse optimization services and inventory management consulting. The fees weren't huge, individually, around $8,000 a month, but over 20 years, that added up to nearly $2 million. $2 million that had gone from our business account to Tom's private account. $2 million I had signed off on without ever questioning it, because Tom handled all the operational expenses and I trusted him. My hands were shaking as I held the papers. Tom had been stealing from our company, from me, for 20 years, but then I kept reading. Every single dollar that went into the TH Operations account came back out again. Not to Tom personally, not to some offshore account or luxury purchase. It went to people who needed it. Families facing medical emergencies, single mothers who couldn't make rent, kids who needed help with college tuition, workers who'd been injured on the job at other companies and couldn't afford their medical bills. There were detailed files on each person Tom had helped, background information, how he'd found them, what their situation was, how much they needed, follow-up notes on how they were doing years later. The Martinez family from the photo had lost their home to a fire. Insurance only covered part of it. Tom had given them $15,000 to rebuild. In his notes, he'd written, "Father works in manufacturing. 3 kids. Good people. They'll pay it forward someday." The Chen family's daughter had been diagnosed with leukemia. Treatment was bankrupting them. Tom had covered $8,000 in medical bills. His note, "Treatment successful. Rachel is in remission. Parents are working 2 jobs each to stay afloat. This gives them breathing room." I found a separate folder labeled long-term support. Inside were files for 3 families Tom had been helping for years. Monthly payments of $500 or $1,000, going back a decade or more. All people who'd fallen through the cracks somehow. A disabled veteran whose benefits had gotten tangled in red tape. An elderly woman whose pension had been embezzled by her financial advisor. A family of refugees trying to get established in the country. Tom had been running a private charity out of our warehouse for 20 years, funded by money he was technically embezzling from our company, and he'd never told anyone. I sat in that chair until the overhead lights automatically shut off for the night, triggered by no motion. I sat in the darkness and tried to process what I'd discovered. My business partner had been stealing from me. There was no other word for it. The TH Operations setup was fake. The consulting fees were fraudulent. If the IRS ever audited us and found this, we'd be in serious trouble. Tom had put our entire company at risk, but he'd done it to help people. People who had nowhere else to turn. I thought about calling Linda. Then I thought about calling my lawyer. Then I thought about calling the police. I did none of those things. Instead, I drove home in silence, the folder of documents sitting on my passenger seat like a bomb waiting to go off. My wife, Claire, was in the kitchen when I got home. She took one look at my face and set down the dish she was drying. "What happened?" I told her everything, every detail. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to something I couldn't quite read. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked. "I don't know. Are you angry?" I thought about it. Was I angry? I should have been. Tom had betrayed my trust. He'd put our business at risk. He'd made me complicit in what was essentially a fraud scheme, even if I hadn't known about it. But every time I tried to feel angry, I thought about that letter from Dorothy Garcia. "You saved my grandson's life." I don't know. I said again. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out how I'd missed this for 20 years. How had Tom managed to hide an entire second life? How had I never noticed the TH operations payments? How had I been so blind? The answer, I realized, was that I'd wanted to be blind. Tom handled the warehouse. That was our arrangement. I didn't question it because it was easier not to. I took my salary, enjoyed my comfortable life, and never looked too closely at where the money went or how the business actually operated day to day. I'd been a silent partner in more ways than one. The next morning, I called our company accountant, a woman named Rebecca, who'd been with us for 12 years. Rebecca, I need you to pull all the records for payments to TH Operations LLC for the past 20 years. There was a pause. TH Operations? Tom's consulting thing? You knew about it? Of course. It's been in the book since I started. You signed off on it every year in the annual budget review. I had signed off on it. I just hadn't paid attention to what I was signing. I need a full accounting of every payment we've made to that entity. Sure, but it'll take me a few days to compile everything. Can I ask why? Just do it, please. I spent the weekend going through Tom's files at home, the ones I'd taken from the secret office. There was a pattern to how he chose who to help. Tom read local newspapers religiously. He looked for stories about people facing hardship through no fault of their own. He'd clip the articles, investigate the situations, and if they checked out, he'd send help. But he didn't just throw money at problems. He was strategic about it. He looked for people who were trying to help themselves, who just needed a little boost to get over a temporary crisis. He avoided giving cash directly when possible. He paid medical bills directly to hospitals. He paid tuition directly to schools. He set up payment plans with landlords. He wanted to help, but he wanted to do it smart. In one file, I found a letter Tom had written, but never sent. It was dated 6 months ago, addressed to me. David, it read, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone, and you've found the warehouse office. I know this will be a shock, and you have every right to be furious. What I've been doing is technically illegal, and I've put our business at risk. I'm sorry for that, but I'm not sorry for helping those people. You and we've had good lives. We've made good money from a business that probably charged too much for what we sold. These families, they needed help, and nobody else was going to give it to them. I couldn't just ignore that. I figured one day I'd tell you about all this, maybe get you on board. But I was always afraid you'd make me stop, so I kept it secret. That was cowardly of me. I hope you can understand, even if you can't forgive. The files are all there if you want to continue what I started. Or you can shut it down and protect the business. I'll understand either way. Your friend Tom. I read that letter 5 times. Then I called Linda. Linda, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Did you know about the TH Operations account? She sighed. David, can we meet? This isn't a phone conversation. We met at a diner halfway between our houses. Linda looked older than she had at the funeral, like grief had aged her a decade in a week. She ordered coffee she didn't drink and twisted a napkin in her hands. I knew, she said. Not at first. Tom kept it from me for the first 5 years, but eventually he had to tell me, because the accountant questioned why so much money was going out of our personal savings to match what he was taking from the business. He told me everything, showed me the files, the families he was helping. I was furious at first. We could have been building wealth, saving for retirement, traveling. Instead, he was giving it all away. But you stayed with him. I did. Because once I saw what he was doing, I really saw it. I couldn't make him stop. Those people needed help, David. Real help. Not thoughts and prayers or government programs that took months to kick in. Immediate, practical help. Tom gave them that. How could I tell him to stop? Why didn't he tell me? He was afraid. You two had a good partnership, and he didn't want to risk it. He thought if you knew, you'd make him shut it down to protect the business. Were you going to? I didn't answer right away because I didn't know. Would I have? Probably. The responsible thing, the legal thing, would have been to stop Tom immediately, report the misuse of company funds, restructure the financials, protect ourselves from liability. But sitting there in that diner, looking at Linda's tired eyes, I thought about something else. I thought about how I'd spent the last 20 years of my life. I'd made good money. I'd provided for my family. I'd bought a nice house, nice cars, taken nice vacations. I'd saved for retirement. I'd done everything right, everything responsible, and I'd helped exactly no one. Tom had done something wrong, something illegal, something risky, and he'd changed 43 families' lives. Maybe more, maybe hundreds. If I counted all the people in those families and all the ripple effects of his help. What are you going to do? Linda asked. I stirred my coffee. I don't know yet. I need to think. Tom left something for you, she said. In his will, he wanted you to have his half of the business. No strings attached. He knew this might come out, and he wanted to make sure you were protected. I don't want his half of the business. He also left you a choice. There's a letter for you at my house. He wrote it a year ago, updated it every few months. He said if anything happened to him, I should give it to you after you found the warehouse office. I met Linda at her house that evening. She handed me an envelope with my name on it in Tom's careful handwriting. I sat in my car and opened it. David, if you're reading this, you know everything now. I'm sorry for the deception. I'm sorry for the risk, but I'm not sorry for the help I gave. Here's what I need you to understand. That money was going to exist either way. The business was profitable enough to absorb it. We could have taken it as bonuses and bought boats or second homes. Instead, I chose to give it to people who needed it more than we needed another luxury. I know that wasn't my call to make alone, but I made it anyway. Now you get to make a call. You can shut down TH operations. You can report what I did. You can protect yourself and the business. I'll understand. Or you can keep it going. The infrastructure is all there. The vetting process. The distribution system. You just need to continue making the monthly transfers and reviewing the applications. People will keep needing help, David. There will always be more Martinez families and more Chen families. The question is whether we're going to be the kind of people who help them. I made my choice. Now you get to make yours. Whatever you decide, thank you for 20 years of partnership. You were a better friend than you knew. Tom. I sat in that car for an hour, holding that letter, and I thought about my life. I thought about my father, who worked in a factory for 40 years and died 6 months after retiring, never having seen Europe or learned to play golf or done any of the things he said he'd do someday. I thought about my kids, who were good people but who'd grown up comfortable and maybe a little entitled because they'd never had to struggle. I thought about Claire, who volunteered at a food bank once a month and always felt like she should be doing more but never quite figured out what that more should be. And I thought about Tom, who'd found a way to do more and had done it quietly for 20 years without asking for recognition or praise. I went home and told Claire I wanted to continue what Tom had started. Are you sure? She asked. No, but I think that's the point. Tom wasn't sure either. He did it anyway. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I've helped 11 families. I've paid for a kid's surgery. I've covered rent for a family whose father had a stroke and couldn't work. I've helped a young woman escape an abusive relationship by paying for her first month's rent and deposit in a new city. I've sent a talented student to college. Every Friday, I drive out to the warehouse and spend the day in Tom's secret office, reading applications, vetting stories, making decisions about who to help and how much to give. I've brought Claire into it. She helps with the research and the follow-up. We've had to be more careful about the legal structure, set up proper charitable trusts to avoid the issues Tom created. But the core mission is the same. The business can afford it. That's what I realized. We were making more than we needed, charging prices that were higher than necessary, accumulating wealth we didn't require. We could afford to help. I think about Tom every Friday when I sit in that office. I think about how he spent 20 years living 2 lives, and how one of those lives mattered more than anyone knew. I think about the courage it took to start helping that first family, knowing it was risky and wrong and might blow up in his face. I think about the discipline it took to keep doing it, week after week, year after year, never telling anyone, never seeking credit. I also think about how angry I was when I first found out, how betrayed I felt, how my first instinct was to protect myself, protect the business, make sure I wasn't liable for Tom's choices. I'm ashamed of that now. Not because those instincts were wrong, exactly, but because they showed me who I'd become. Someone who valued safety over service. Someone who'd rather protect what he had than risk it to help others. Tom taught me something in death that he never managed to teach me in life. That having enough means you have enough to share. That comfort is a luxury, but making a difference is a privilege. Last week, I helped a family whose house had been destroyed in a tornado. The father called me, crying, thanking me for giving them hope. He asked if he could meet me in person, shake my hand, thank me properly. I told him no. I told him the person he wanted to thank had died, but that he'd want the family to pay it forward someday when they were back on their feet. What was his name? The father asked. Tom, I said. His name was Tom. I still don't know if what I'm doing is right. I'm probably still breaking laws, even with the charitable trust structure. I'm probably still putting the business at some kind of risk. If my accountant really looked closely at everything, she'd have questions I couldn't comfortably answer. But every Friday, I drive out to that warehouse, and I sit in Tom's chair, and I read stories about people who are trying their best and falling short through no fault of their own. And I help them, not because I'm generous or noble or particularly good, but because Tom showed me that I could, and because not helping, once you know you can, feels worse than any risk. Claire says I've changed in the past 6 months. She says I'm quieter, more thoughtful. She says I seem like I'm carrying something heavy, but that the weight looks good on me. I think what I'm carrying is responsibility. Real responsibility. Not the business kind, where you're responsible for profit margins and quarterly reports, but the human kind, where you're responsible for actually making a difference in the world. Tom made a difference. He did it wrong, legally speaking. He did it in secret, which wasn't fair to me or Linda. He put our business and our friendship at risk, but he did it. And that matters more than how he did it. I keep his letter in my desk drawer at the warehouse. Sometimes, when I'm struggling with a decision about whether to help someone or how much to give, I take it out and read the last line again. The question is whether we're going to be the kind of people who help them. Tom answered that question for himself 20 years ago. I'm answering it now. One Friday at a time. One family at a time. It's not revenge. Exactly what I'm doing. It's not even really about Tom anymore. It's about figuring out who I want to be in the last third of my life, and whether I want to be remembered as someone who accumulated comfort or someone who created change. I think I know which one Tom would choose. I think I know which one I'm choosing too. Every Tuesday, I still sign off on the operational expenses without looking too closely. But now I know exactly where some of that money goes. And I'm okay with that. Actually, I'm more than okay with it. I'm grateful. Grateful that Tom showed me a different way to live. Grateful that I found out before it was too late for me to follow his example. Grateful that I get to sit in his chair every Friday and continue what he started. The warehouse closes at 5 on Fridays. I'm usually the last one to leave. I lock Tom's office, turn off the lights, and walk through the empty building. Sometimes, I stop and look at the photos on the corkboard. All those families Tom helped over the years. 43 faces that would have different stories if Tom hadn't intervened. Now there are 54. And the number keeps growing. I don't know if Tom would be proud of what I'm doing. I like to think he would be. I like to think he'd appreciate that I'm trying to do it better, more legally, more sustainably than he did. But I also think he'd understand if I messed it up sometimes, if I made mistakes, if I helped the wrong people or not enough people. Because the point isn't perfection. The point is trying. The point is seeing a need and having the courage to meet it, even when it's risky or uncomfortable or complicated. Tom had that courage for 20 years. I'm hoping I can find it for whatever years I have left.